Iran has been holding funeral ceremonies for its former supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Today, it provided a glimpse into who might be in charge there. Iran says it has a new supreme leader. But 4 months after Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, took over, he's still yet to be seen. Instead, Iran showed 3 of Khamenei's sons, Mustafa, Masoud and Mesa. They stood beside the coffin of their father, who was killed in Israeli airstrikes on the very first day of the war on February 28th. His funeral is taking place over several days and is meant to project unity and resilience after months of war with Israel and the United States. But perhaps the most important images are the new faces emerging across Iran's military and political leadership. They all appeared publicly, some for the first time since the war began, signalling who may now be shaping Iran's next moves. So who is really in charge in Iran? Let's ask Behnam Ben Taleblu, an expert on Iran with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C. Great to have you with us. You were no doubt an interested onlooker to the funeral of Khamenei. Of all of what we saw, what did it tell you above all else?
Pleasure to be with you. I think you hit the nail right on the head there, because conspicuously present by his absence was the new supreme leader. The son, technically the second son of Khamenei Sr., Khamenei Jr., which is Mojtaba Khamenei. He has been made supreme leader. There has been pronouncements and addresses made in his name, but his voice, his audio, his likeness, and his video have yet to be seen publicly by Iranian masses or television or even social media. So the great question during the entire funeral, which is expected to go on for a few more days, is if or when Mojtaba will make an appearance. And if he does not, this will lend more credence to the theory that either he may not actually be around, or that he is so badly disfigured or injured or handicapped that he cannot be seen, or even if he is in a relatively okay state, about how much paranoia the regime may have by showcasing this new supreme leader and fearing potential an Israeli-American attack, or perhaps even intelligence about where his comings and goings are. But ultimately, this entire ordeal, which is going to be going on for several more days before the body of the former supreme leader is laid to rest in his hometown of Mashhad, the entire ordeal is born of a contradiction, an attempt by this regime, which is weaker than ever, to project more strength than ever before.
In terms of fighting a war, Iran showed itself to be highly adaptable. Have they proved to be also highly adaptable in the way they're going about things now, in the way the country is led since then? Does the state of the new supreme leader's health matter that much to them at this point?
I actually don't believe in the short to medium term the state or even the presence will matter, because the day-to-day functions of the Islamic Republic weren't even prior to the death of Ali Khamenei being carried out by an 86-year-old man. Even after the 12-day war, for example, where the former supreme leader was not accessible reportedly with electronic communications and only relied on physical couriers, and he was in several underground locations and only seen above ground in a handful of times before the commencement of the new war in late February of 2026. One of the legacies of Ali Khamenei was the securitization of Iran's politics and the institutionalization of the way that system functioned. And while even prior to this war and even prior to the protests in early 2026, this was a system, this was a state that was sliding, at least in terms of the statistics, structural things that matter, the economy, social health indicators, environmental health indicators, you name it, that was sliding towards failed state status anyway. And their management of the war, and dare I even say their resilience during the war, is one thing, but their ability to engage in statecraft, to be able to co-opt populations that were already at odds with them politically and ideologically, that, of course, I would say remains to be seen and probably is still in the red.
OK, so just on the issue of statecraft, if Mojtaba holds the title but remains hidden, are these men that we see emerging simply acting beneath him, or is Iran effectively being run by collective leadership at this point, do you think?
Collective leadership, I think, is the name of the game, but there is a primus inter pares here, and that primus inter pares is not necessarily the office of the supreme leader, although I do think the nameless and faceless security and intelligence bureaucrats that have made that office an office during the 37-year reign of Ali Khamenei did matter and do continue to matter, those, of course, that have survived. But I would point you to two different organizations, one political organization, one military, that will matter. The military one is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the parallel ideological military to the national military, which has its veterans and tentacles across other elements of the Iranian state in a civil sense, across the economy, and across society. The other one I would point you to is the SNSC, the Supreme National Security Council. This is a key national security decision-making body that has political and military elites within it, and that, as we saw during the war, was capable of at least making some sort of decision. So I would say, make no mistake, while the presence of Mojtaba Khamenei will matter for the regime's longer-term narrative, whether they're selling that to society or to foreign adversaries or allies, the day-to-day, I think, will continue to be defined by those two organizations. And it's best to think of the future of the Islamic Republic in terms of the balance of power between these organizations and the fights within them.
Behnam, you talk about the relative weakness of the regime. I think it's possible to watch from the outside and read a certain amount of confidence in the actions and the posture of the Iranian regime since the end of daily fighting, or not?
Or even during the course of the 40-day war, absolutely. It is entirely possible for a person, for an entity, for a business, for a state, or even for a regime to be weak but still lethal, as the Islamic Republic is, to be weak but still hubristic, I would say, as the Islamic Republic is. And one of the strong suits of the regime wasn't even necessarily how just they fought the war on the battlefield, because obviously they extended that into the homes of Americans with their Lego AI videos that went viral on social media, or against the front lines and civilian infrastructure of many of the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf that sit beside Iran or just across from Iran, but also their ability to fight on the plane of information, the information war, the ideological war, the psychological operations. Those are things where the funeral of Ali Khamenei, the rhetoric of Iranian officials, even on social media, and even amid an internet blackout, the longest reported internet blackout in history, for example. Those are things that matter, and those are how the regime projects confidence, even when there's really a lot more capability that needs to be made up for in a material sense.
Is the Iranian regime more powerful inside Iran as a result of the war?
I would say, if you're looking at key decision makers, there's actually, despite there being a more rancorous debate over this thing now, the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, that will govern this 60-day period between the U.S. and Iran, where there is this deal, where there is sanctions relief, where there is a real pause, allegedly pause in the fighting. There are some who are saying, yes, the Islamic Republic has emerged on top. But there's others who are pointing to the much more rancorous debate inside the country about the MOU, about even the morality and the necessity of engaging with a state like the U.S., which just a couple months ago helped kill the supreme leader, helped go after the regime's missile, military, and nuclear enterprises, and meaningfully set them back. And it is, in so many ways, it's quite odd that the Trump administration is not fighting the information war and the ideological war this way, because one of the famous lines of Khamenei for years was that there would be no war, that there would be no negotiations, that there would be no deal, that there would be no talks. And yet we've seen there was a war, there was negotiations, there was talks, even during his life and even after his life. And so, in essence, this regime, I would say, at its core, the decision makers that matter, there is more cohesion there. But abroad, when you zoom out a bit, there is greater cacophony on the fringes of that system, particularly the hard right of that system.
So with that picture that you've painted really vividly, does the absence of a visible supreme leader, do you think, make another war more likely, because competing power centres inside Iran could push Iran in different directions, or less likely because no one wants to take the risk?
Well, I would say it's the confidence of this regime that would make another war more likely. And again, confidence and capability, sometimes those arrows point in different directions, and that's how you get into accidental wars or inadvertent escalation. Even during the 67-day ceasefire between April 8th and I think June 14, when you had the formal ceasefire after the 40-day war, and then the start of the MOU after negotiations in June, During that time, you've seen several rounds of this regime's confidence pushing it forward. And it was really the US that sometimes responded to fire and then sometimes did not respond to fire. And even when it did respond, it chose to let the regime close the round to get the last blow in. And yes, from the US military perspective, what the US took away or the damage the US did may be sufficient to get America to step back. But the fact that the regime was able to close the round, be it against adversaries closer to home, perceived, or adversaries further than home, real, that confidence is what is likely going to beget future escalation, future risk taking by coordination between these centers who may see, holding on to their revolutionary ideology and acting on it as a way to swim together or sink together.
So with that confidence in mind, is Iran ready to come to a long-lasting peace deal with the US?
That I fundamentally do not believe. There are many distinguished Iran watchers in America and Europe and Australia and Canada, really all around the world, some of whom predicated their analysis on the hostility of America and Iran together being just a mere function of Ali Khamenei's rhetoric and worldview and ideology. I unfortunately believe that rhetoric and worldview and ideology is much more institutionalized, is much more systematized, and that which we may see at the top from a few figures, that the U.S. or others may call pragmatic, that is not moderation, that is opportunism, where the ideology remains the core and the ability to, use any ways or use any means to achieve the same ideological end is what we're seeing from this different elite at the helm of the Islamic Republic today.
Behnam Ben Taleblu with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies in Washington D.C. Thanks so much for lending us your expertise on the state of the Iranian leadership. It was great to talk to you again. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Right then, that's all for now. Before we leave, we ask you for your thoughts. Leave them in the comments before you leave. Is the Iranian regime more powerful now than it was before the war? Let us know.